It's the Stand Up with Pete Dominic podcast. Hello, friends, and thank you very much for hanging out with me today for Press and Play. I think you're going to love my conversation with the great David Rothkopf, who I talked to about Vice President Kamala Harris getting no respect. Well, he certainly gives her a lot. Also talked about what's happening with the war in Ukraine, the conclusion of the NATO summit, and his great article about Israel's rightward lurch. Great conversation with Rothkopf today. I know you're going to love it. He's always great, and he's become one of mine and clearly your favorites. Shout out and thank you to everybody who hung out with me last night at the stand-up happy hour hangout. We had so much fun, lots of laughs, and a great conversation as always. A lot of ball busting. Kimberly Richardson said at one point to me, Pete, how do you interview so many of these really worldly people and yet know so little? And we thought that was pretty funny. So I'm happy to take a shot. All right. So I've got a great conversation coming up, but I'm also, just a heads up, headed down under, getting on a plane today for about 1 billion hours. It gets fly out to L.A., like 5-6 hours, and then jump on the plane to Sydney for another 15 hours. I'll be wearing my compression socks, apparently a mask, and I don't know what else. Everybody was yelling at me to make sure I wear on the flight. Appreciate all of your support this week, all of your advice. I appreciate your subscription to the show and hope that you love this conversation with David Rothkopf. Again, my posting will be erratic. I might take the whole time off. I might post a few things. I don't know. Follow me on all the social media networks. Check out in Discord, where I hope to jump in and let you know how I'm doing down there. And I'll always be giving you updates about what I learn and become enlightened about in a brand new country that I've never visited in my life. If you got any advice, email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. I'll read them in the airport. I promise you that. All right, here we go. David Rothkopf, of course, is the host of Deep State Radio, which is an awesome podcast. He is the author of several books, I think 10 books that he's written, including most recently American Resistance, the inside story of how the deep state saved the nation. You can read him at the Daily Beast, where he's a regular contributor. Let him know that you heard him here by saying hi on Twitter or any of the other social media outlets. Always love when he stops by, and today was no exception. We get started by talking about the vice president, and we take off from there. I hope you like it, and I hope to hear from you as always. I feel like one of the big issues that you've been saying for a long time, and I don't know if there's a lot of other folks out there that defend Kamala Harris the way that you do. And talk to me about your latest feeling as to why you feel like she's been undervalued, undercovered, covered inappropriately. The current
well, look, she's out there.
Yeah.
Here's somebody who is a vice president. We don't normally scrutinize vice presidents, but because she's a woman of color, she is getting attacked in a different way. You know, was Mike Pence the tower of intellect, tower of character? No. Dan Quayle? Nope. Dick Cheney shot somebody in the face. Joe Biden, when he was the vice president of the United States, was thought of as an affable guy, but wasn't really making a huge difference. And the big stand that he took with Obama was against continuing in Afghanistan, and Obama overrode him.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, we can go back, right? The story is the story. But here is a woman who has come in, has met with something like 130 different world leaders, has been to 35 different states, has been given a bunch of tough portfolios. Everybody's like, oh, how's she doing on the border? The border's a crisis. Well, why don't we go look at the border, okay? What's the data on the border in the past year, in the past 6 months since the expiration of Title 42? Immigration is down.
Yeah.
What's the data on capturing unsavory characters going across the border? Up, way up. That's enforcement. Do we have new deals with Mexico, with Central America? Yes, we do. Did she play a central role in that? Yes, she did. She traveled around the world to help support building the coalition that's in Ukraine, an active role dealing with world leaders. She's been to the Munich Security Conference twice. She has been to Africa, been to Latin America, been to Southeast Asia, all to help counterbalance Chinese influence. Been very effective. Who's the leading spokesperson to young people, to women, to people of color, the base that is going to reelect this president? She is. Who is taking the leading role in speaking out against guns, in speaking out against the Dobbs decision on abortion?
Yeah.
She is. So I got to tell you, when the Republicans go, oh, she laughs a lot, you got to stop and say, what kind of bullshit is that?
Yeah, well, there's nothing worse than tasking the vice president of the United States with something that requires a solution in the form of major legislation and then blaming her for not succeeding. And that's what I'm talking about with immigration.
Well, yeah, but with it, she has done, she helped get $4 billion of investment to go into the Northern Triangle countries of Central America to help create jobs there so that people don't immigrate. She cut a deal with the president of Mexico, AMLO, for cooperation on border issues that we didn't have before.
It sounds like
she had a special relationship with him. She cut through.
It sounds like you're saying there's only just so much a vice president can do. And in comparison with the past vice presidents, she's done pretty darn well and been very effective on issues, especially being the first female, the first black woman, and what that means, just what she...
Right. And look, every job and people are like, well, she didn't do well running for president. Well, let's just hold your horses there. She ran for district attorney in San Francisco, won re-election. She ran for state attorney general in California, won re-election. While she was the attorney general of California, she ran the second biggest Department of Justice in the United States after the United States Department of Justice. So she had big executive experience. She ran for the Senate and she won re-election to the Senate. She's won re-election for every job she's run for. She boosted fundraising for the Biden campaign. She helped Biden win. Everybody acknowledges that.
Right.
And when they talk about, her poll ratings are roughly the same as the president. Typically, a vice president gets slightly lower rating than the president that they serve.
God, I hate
because
these.
That's how people think. It's
ratings,
all
these poll
bullshit.
ratings of people. It's like, especially in this day and age, it's just
right. But think of the whole United States. In the whole United States, who has been closer to the presidency, dealing with the issues that we know now internationally and domestically, and is therefore ready to be president? Who else? Nobody. The Republicans, they have two people who could possibly claim this. One, a former president, Donald Trump, about to be indicted. The only guy who's ever signed up for the Indictment of the Month Club, who is the most corrupt president in American history, an absolute failure at everything he touched, and his vice president, who sat there like a bobblehead doll, and every time Trump made a proposal that was horrible, violated the law, with one exception, did something terrible to a whole group of people, he just nodded and went along with it.
Right.
Kamala Harris is, other than Joe Biden, the person in the United States most qualified to be president of the United States. What
about Ron DeSantis?
That's a good choice. And you're right. Ron DeSantis has displayed character, vision, great vertical leap, has the ability to dunk with two hands. I mean, Ron DeSantis is terrible. Terrible.
What's the metaphor? Go ahead.
No, he's just a bad governor of Florida. He's a bad guy.
Have you ever seen a politician campaigning for office and they keep firing a bunch of people and they eventually succeed? Because that's never you're selling you, and you're currently the governor, and you're kind of blaming strategy and personnel, and
this happens all the time, right? In the NFL, fire the coach.
Yeah.
Right. That's not the issue, right? Or fire the manager in baseball. That's not the issue. You've got the wrong players playing badly.
Yeah.
And so let's, move the deck chairs around in the Titanic. The reason that DeSantis is doing badly is he's an awful person with a terrible record.
Yeah.
That's not a good combination to win the presidency of the United States.
You have written two really important articles about the NATO summit. kind of one on the way up to it, and then one at the conclusion of it, which are detailed and important, and some of your best writing. I love when you're writing about international relations and these types of summits and what goes into them and what the stakes are and who the players are and why it matters, because it's so much more granular than just a top-line conversation. I want to ask you about them, and obviously this really important piece you've written about what's gone on in Israel, which is such a great piece, questioning whether or not we should continue supporting them with all of our money and military aid. So NATO, it's over. It was a big deal. And the President of the United States went along with other world leaders. They committed, doubled down, tripled down on their support for Ukraine in the war there. They've added members now. I mean, what do you want to say about what happened, what transpired, and what the United States' role was in it?
Nothing. You just summed it up pretty well.
All right.
No, well, let me say one thing, right? Let's remember where we're coming from. The prior president of the United States wanted to shut down NATO. He said to his cabinet, and I report this in my last book, and other people have too, he said, if I get reelected, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to end NATO. The prior president of the United States loved no one so much as Vladimir Putin, kissed his ass publicly in many places. And contrary to the bullshit that he says about, well, if I were president again, I'd end this war in 2 seconds. The war was going on for every minute he was president.
Yeah.
And he didn't do anything to stop the war except support the invader. Okay. So that's where we were. Now
the war began in another world on a Sunday show. The argument would be the war began. You were the president. You could have done things and you didn't.
Well, I mean, the war began in 2014. You know, Obama could have done things too.
Sure.
Neither one of those two guys stepped up and did what was necessary. Joe Biden did. Joe Biden has taken NATO from being something that many people thought was on the scrap heap of history that didn't have a mission.
Yeah.
And through a lot of leadership and with some strong leadership on the European side, revitalized it. It is bigger than ever. Adding Sweden and Finland is not a small thing. It's a big thing. It's now got nearly 1,000 miles more northern frontier with Russia. It's got much greater control over the Baltic region, much greater control over issues in the north generally. It's got much greater activism on the part of all of its members. The members are unified around the defense of Ukraine in a way that nobody could have possibly believed. The NATO is moving forward with putting more of its troops closer to the borders with Russia to provide a stronger defense. NATO is moving forward to cooperate with countries in the Pacific region to help be a global force for peace, a defensive alliance that is doing its job better than it's ever done it before. And with respect specifically to Ukraine, despite a kerfuffle about the language pertaining to how Ukraine will join NATO, NATO has made the commitment that Ukraine is going to be a member at some point in the future. They have to wait to the end of this war so it does not, by becoming a member, trigger a broader war. But, you know, the National Security Advisor of the United States has said, look, there's no question. It's not a question of if. It's a question of when.
Right.
This is a big deal in and of itself. So, you know, you gotta, and this is an ongoing thing. You have to maintain a coalition. The United States just released another $400 million to Ukraine. It's leading by example. It's given by far the largest sums of money to support Ukraine. Could we be doing more? Yes. Should we be doing more? Yes, I think we should. But can you fault this administration for its handling of NATO, for its handling of the Ukraine war, for its boldness, vision, resolve, foreign policy, dexterity? No, it's a big success.
And none of this would have happened had Vladimir Putin not created this war of choice.
Absolutely right. I mean,
the strength of NATO.
There's a certain person who's running for president of the United States who is an absolute, fuckhead. And I don't even mention his name because I think it's
Ravik Ramaswamy.
Not him.
Oh.
Although he falls into that category too. I try not to mention any of these losers, but there was one who was on TV yesterday or on Fox going, well, if the United States had not encouraged Ukraine to start this war. And it's like,
oh, yeah.
Like what?
RFK, you on with Hannity.
And it's, and here is a like former, heroin addict who is absolutely wrong on every issue, lies about everything. The reason I don't mention it is like these people shouldn't be on the news.
He keeps mentioning this argument that there were peace negotiations and that Russia made an offering, and because of the U.S., Ukraine turned them down, and other.
It's just bullshit. It's just 100%
nobody ever
bullshit.
is able to push back on him with the, it's
but the media likes having him on saying these kind of crazy things because he's got a famous name, and it's like, yeah, sure. Remember the naked cowboy in Times Square?
When I think about the war in Ukraine, and I've always been anti-war my entire life, this is the first conflict I think I've ever really supported. And I think about 2014 and that revolution in what's it called, Square in Kiev, I believe, and they were young people in the streets, and they were out there freezing, and some of them got killed, and they were out there for months. I think that's what started it, and I don't think that the CIA was behind that. I don't think that that was some AstroTurf revolution. So that's where I start when I think about who to side with.
The war started because Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia had no grounds to invade Ukraine. Russia has no claim on Ukraine. Russia had signed treaties saying it wouldn't do that. Russia has imperial ambitions. Prior to doing that, it invaded Georgia. Prior to doing that, actually, over the course of the past X thousand years or so, every single thing that became part of the Soviet Union and then current Russia came to it because of an invasion by Russia. This is how they do it. And it was groundless. It's been inhumane from beginning to end. It's just absurd to blame the Ukrainians or the West. And, anybody who's doing that is doing so to get attention. Yeah. I've been accidentally a journalist from time to time, or an editor of a publication. And, you have to stop, and say, is this newsworthy?
Right.
Is if it's a lie,
right?
If it's just wrong on its face, if it's disinformation, if it's advancing something that's going to do damage, it's not.
By the way, I watched the PBS NewsHour last night and the NBC Nightly News, and one of the top 3 stories from Lester Holt was that LeBron James' son had suffered a heart attack, which was terrible. But the NewsHour, I think, mentioned it at the very end of their hour, but they didn't have a segment dedicated to it. And of course, they pick those stories because what's going to get the most ratings. But it was just a disparity. You mentioned this earlier. You went on a rant about it, what to cover editorially, which is why we're talking about these issues, obviously, with you. So let me ask you, Ukraine offensive. There's a lot of talk about it. There's different narratives. There's different spins. You were tweeting, who is it? Weiss, who I like. To read. What do we need to know? What are your thoughts on where we're at? I hear the Russians are running out of ammunition. I don't know what that means. Why doesn't the Chinese just give them some more?
Well, first of all, the Chinese haven't been giving them ammunition. The Chinese have been giving them some dual-use equipment, which the Russians have been employing. But the Russians have not gotten the support from their so-called allies that they wanted, which may be one reason why their defense minister is in North Korea right now,
asking for a couple.
Yeah, anything. Give me a bag of bullets, But the reality is, as Michael Weiss points out in a recent article, that in the Russian media and the Ukrainian media, where the expectations were not, the U.S. media is like, oh, there's going to be a counteroffensive. We're going to win, and it's going to be a great ending for the movie. And essentially in these other media where that wasn't the expectation, they see that Ukraine is making progress around Bakhmut, making progress along its front lines, making progress that could position itself ultimately for a push to the sea and breaking through those lines, making progress striking Crimea, striking the bridge in Crimea, striking ammo dumps in Crimea, making progress by launching drone attacks and so forth, making progress in ways that we don't even measure. One thing that a lot of people don't talk about is one of the reasons that Prigozhin sort of fell out of favor with the top guys in Russia and ultimately turned on them and did his little mini coup attempt was because he was hammered in Bakhmut. The Ukrainians, ultimately lost this little town, which is kind of strategically negligible.
Right.
But in hammering him, they created a tension within Russia that led to this thing. And now we're finding out that Putin responded to that sort of cool it by being paralyzed, by not knowing what to do, by sitting in his bunker.
Lost that battle, but really gained some ground on the overall war.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that it was strategically smart. And so, Weiss and the others were saying, well, look, that ground is being gained. Take the long view. Recognize that Russia is hugely depleted. And, if you want evidence of this, the Russians are about to up the conscription age to 30 because they need to add more people to their army. And so it's raising it from 27 to 30.
Wow.
Something that they have not done since World War II. So I think I saw a story also that they're making it possible for people to enlist if they're 60 or something like that, which says something. Russia is a country in which at birth, a male has a life expectancy of 64 years. Only slightly more than half Russian men make it to 65.
Wow.
When you're in your 60s in Russia, you're old.
Yeah.
And so in every conceivable way, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. And the reason is they want to keep this going till, maybe the American elections go the other way and Donald Trump says, hey, guess what, Vlad, you won. We're not giving them any more. I'm pulling out of NATO.
It makes
do whatever you want. Have a big slice of Poland if you want.
There's so much at stake for Putin and Russia that what wouldn't they do to interfere in our election? How much do you think about that?
So much at stake. So much at stake. And it's, almost as much as there is for Trump. The only way Trump's going to avoid felony convictions, jail, ignominy is if he gets reelected president.
What if the Russians get to one of the jury members and say, listen, you're gonna have to let this Trump off or else,
What if they work real hard to tilt the election in the other direction? What if, they've done that before?
Yeah.
If you're Vladimir Putin, your active measures in the United States may be more important to the outcome of the war in Ukraine than your battle along the front lines.
That's better said than what I was trying to say earlier without my silly screenplay conspiracy starring Jason Statham. That's who I think would start in that jury influencing.
But he stars in all movies because that's how you see yourself, right?
I see myself as Idris Elba in Apple TV's Hijack, like really smart,
that's
sexy.
Really uncanny. That's why we relate to each other, because I'm constantly stopped in the street by people who say, "Are you Idris Elba?"
Oh, really?
Yeah, people think I'm Idris Elba.
That's so weird because I never heard anybody else be compared to him than me.
Then you, it's weird. And my wife often will call out the name Idris at intimate moments. Yeah.
Huh.
And I assume that's she. Don't you think that's because she
probably
confuses me with him?
Yeah. So let's talk about, I don't know if this is the most important piece you've written, but it's certainly about a very recently, very, very important issue that you've been writing about, thinking about, talking about, dealing with forever. And it's what's going on in Israel, in the Middle East. You've got a piece of the Daily Beast titled, "This is the End of the U.S.-Israel, quote, special relationship. The ultra-right-wing Netanyahu government can no longer claim special status as the Mideast's only democracy. And Americans share the blame." Rothkopf, you really took it to him. But I guess what's most interesting is that in this article, you write about the other maybe unlikely people who are also criticizing what has gone on in Israel, not to mention, and most importantly, the majority of the people in Israel.
Yeah, well, right. Let's not leave them out of it. Ultimately, this is an Israeli thing, but because the United States played an essential role in Israel's history, and we have historical ties, we look at these things carefully because Israel is an important ally. We look at these things carefully. And because Israel has a sort of well-structured political base here in the United States, and by the way, I don't mean a Jewish lobby. The evangelicals are behind it. Other people are behind it. We have tended to give them kind of a blank check. And so, it's appalling on some level that it took Israelis paring away the rights of Jewish Israelis to, get people to wake up to what's going on in this country, because they've been crushing the rights of Palestinians who live within borders they control for decades.
Yes.
And when they do it, when they bulldoze a settlement, when they change their nationality law that makes Palestinians even more second-class citizens, when they shoot innocent people, we give them a pass. We support them. We stop the UN from taking action against them with our veto. And, it's been a slippery slope. And what's happened? You get an extreme right-wing government that has no scruples and no values like ours, and they take full advantage of this. And the one way we're seeing that is in this effort to cut back the power of the Supreme Court in order to give more power and impunity to the prime minister and his crew. But also, I think we're likely to see this in the way they treat the Palestinian territories and settlements going forward. And, it's just at a certain point, we've got to stop and say, wait a minute, what are our national interests? Point one, we were close to Israel during the Cold War because it was a counterbalance against the forces in the region that supported the Soviet Union. Right. Point two, we were really engaged with Israel because the Middle East was important to us as a source of oil, which had strategic relevance to us. We are now the world's leading exporter of oil, the leading producer of oil. Point three, in the wake of the Cold War, we saw Israel as a counterbalance in the war on terror in the region. That war has now been put on the back burner correctly because the threat from terrorists is much less than it was. Point four, there's been a generational change. The people who looked at Israel as the Goliath, as the David that fought against Goliath, that turned the desert green, that won the 6-Day War, the baby boom generation view of Israel have been supplanted. When Barack Obama became an adult, he looked at Israel from the moment essentially it went into the Sabra and Shatila camps and committed some atrocities and has been the bully of the region. Gen X and millennials, or Gen Z and millennials, look at this and they go, what does this have to do with me?
Right.
Nothing.
And including young Jewish people in America.
Yeah, including young like my young Jewish daughters, that who are active in, engaged, in interested in issues like this. And they're just like, we can't support the way they treat and abuse the Palestinians.
And yet there was just a vote, and overwhelmingly in the Congress, they voted basically to full-throated support. You read about that in the article. So it would seem the Congress is far behind the American public attitudes at this point on what's happened.
The Congress is cowardly. 9 people in the United States Congress were willing to say, yeah, Israel is racist. Now, look, if you have policies that discriminate on people based on their ethnicity or national or historical origins, that's racism. Israel's racist. Okay? There are people who don't want to say, well, Israel's an apartheid state, but it's a 2-speed system.
Right.
Jimmy Carter said this. And frankly, when he said it, 20, 25 years ago, I was like, oh my God, this guy's over the top.
He said Israel was an apartheid nation like 20. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, he's crazy. But he was right. I was wrong. And the reality is we need to wake up to that because it has a cost. I mean, set aside emotional ties, set aside some of the affinity issues that are involved here. Right. We have to look at what our national interests are. Is it in our national interest to have an undependable ally that is becoming less and less democratic, that is willing to play footsie with the Russians as they did, that is not going to stand up for us on Ukraine when we ask for their support, that is also, playing footsie with, other rivals of ours around the world? If they're going to be a good, loyal, dependable ally that we share values with, give them all the support they need. If they're not, then go to them and say, well, then you're not going to get as much support. Try to influence them. That's what we do in foreign policy.
What do you think is going to happen in Israeli domestic policy? You write a little bit about how they got there and where they're going. It seems like they're going to go further before they might undo some of what they've done in terms of these judicial reforms. And it's kind of, it's crazy fascinating because you see the protests there and the people in the streets, and everybody seems to be involved. People who are apolitical, young people, old people, conservative people, not to mention, but this is this far right conservative religious minority that is seemingly
right. And I think, they're losing some support in recent polls in Israel, but I just completed one of our podcasts, Deep State Radio podcast, with some experts on this. And they were saying that the Israelis that are in the streets also don't much like the opposition in the Israeli government. That it's going to take, because if you end up with Gantz or Lapid, the other leading opposition figures, they're going to be sort of 80% of Netanyahu, right? And so there is this kind of reawakening of a liberal spirit there. We'll see where that leads. This country is as close to a civil war among the Israelis as it has ever been. This protests have been going on for 30 weeks, and as a percentage of the population there, they represent what would be tens of millions of people in the United States that are in the street every day. And it's a very dire situation, and I just think the United States should not be like coddling Netanyahu.
Yeah, you say aid to Israel cannot be a blank check. It must be driven by U.S. interests. And currently the Netanyahu government, which also sat on the fence when the U.S. called for support in Ukraine, is not acting in those interests.
I think that's true. Former Ambassador Martin Indyk has written about it. Former Ambassador Dan Kurtzer has written about it. Other people, Nick Kristof in the New York Times has written about it. And I think it's just, it's high time. I think people who've given them a blank check have gotten us in part to where we are. They just think they can do whatever they want.
What does it look like to change that policy?
Well, you'd have to have enough support in the Congress, and that's not going to happen really anytime soon. But I think the approach ought to be, well, look, we're here, we're doing this, we've been doing this for a long time, and we plan to continue doing it unless, if you cut back on your democracy, you will lose our support. If you violate the rights of Palestinians in new wholesale ways, you will lose our support. The first way you will lose our support is we will stop defending you in the United Nations. The second way you will lose our support is that we will condemn you publicly. The third way is we will start cutting back on the aid that we are giving you. We are warning you. We're going to set clear red lines. Of course, you're a sovereign state. You can do whatever you want, but so are we.
They have plenty of interest in a Trump presidency as well.
Look, the bad guys in the world want a Trump presidency. Because he's a bad guy and he supports them. And whether it's Netanyahu or Putin or Erdogan or Kim Jong-un, they like the idea of more Trump because it means a weaker America, and it means this slavering idiot will be kissing their asses and not ever raising the issue of values or institutions or U.S. national interest to them, not even once in the course of their meetings.
I will let you go. I appreciate it all. Go read all the articles, listen to Deep State Radio, get the book. I'll mention all that on the way out. Thank you very much, David. It was a great way to leave the country to talk to you first.
I find that when I speak to people, our first impulse is often to leave the country.
What are your thoughts on compression socks for a long flight?
It's not something that I, as a younger person, need, but you might want to look into it.
Okay. Well, then I should probably get them. My very old
You're going to be
legs.
in a very long flight. No, phlebitis could take you out in the blinking of an eye.
Is that right?
You could just be sitting there watching some old, Curb Your Enthusiasm episodes. And the next thing you know, we're doing the memorial show here on the Pete Dominick
Are you
Network.
doing like a pharma ad for some drug to treat phlebitis? Have you been on a long flight and there you are watching old Curb episodes? Well, guess
what? I just, when I flew back just now from on this unending 5-day late flight to get out of Sicily, all I watched on the way back was episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah, I got to figure out what I'm going to watch. I'm open to anybody's suggestions. So
because you need 25 hours of programming.
I need a lot of programming. So we'll see what people come up with.
One thing you might want to think about is Law and Order SVU. It's in its 24th season or something. Just start at the beginning.
I'm going to be working. I'm going to be writing things and editing things. And
on the plane?
Yeah, for sure I will be.
No, you're not.
Yes, I do.
You're going to be eating, sleeping, and probably in terms of the duration of that flight, getting up and going to pee 26 times.
I'm going to be cutting highlights of this interview to share on Twitter. That's what I'm going to do on my flight.
Sure you are.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
The last time I went to Australia with my wife, she took like a Xanax or something, and she was gone for 26 hours. We got landed the plane, and I was like, "Oh, it's Australia," and she was like, "I'm fresh as a daisy."
Let's hilarious.
Go to Canberra.
I was once on a plane where a guy acted up, and I had to be a hero. Listeners have heard this many times, but one detail that I'm always reminded by is that my brother-in-law had taken a drug. And I was saving the plane like John McClane in Die Hard, and he was just leaning back with his mouth agape. And when we got to JFK, he had no idea that I had prevented a terrorist attack. No idea.
Wait a second. You really are Idris Elba, aren't you?
Yeah. I once was. I tied a man up with my belt, and then he ripped my shirt off, and then I was just my chest was out, and I, bald like this, and a lot of people. So I was just like, yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker, and I was basically in the movie. Yeah, on a trip from Sicily. As a matter of fact, a Sicilian man attacked me and several other passengers. Yeah.
Was he a relative or a friend of yours?
No. He was just some guy on the flight, and me and several other heroes were able to pin him down. And as a thank you, the airline sent me in the mail a shaving kit with mostly hair care products.
That's a little harsh.
Yeah,
that's kind of a brutal commentary.
I was looking for a flight.
If you have any influence with the airline, our luggage has not arrived yet.
You got to get yourself. You know what I'm doing? I'm tagging it with the air tags. So
so you can go to Palermo Airport and go back and say, "Oh no, it's there. It's over there by the wildfire. Give me that back." I mean,
you're gonna get your bag's gonna be singed.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, good luck with that.
Enjoy Australia. It's one of the great places on earth.
Thank you, sir.
But be careful because virtually everything there.
Here we go. He's going to tell me everything's going to kill me.
Everything will kill you. Read the story. Google the story.
No, I don't think I will. I think I'll talk over you.
No. Read the story. Google the story. Just Google man who was bitten twice on the balls by deadly spider.
You're not a good person. It's not a good thing to do to someone.
No, but it's a great story, but it was the same guy twice. 2 different times. He sits down, feels the pain. It's a deadly poisonous spider.
Oh, good.
Bites him on the balls.
Yeah.
He thinks, well, that's never going to happen again, but he was wrong.
Spider will never find mine. It's like they're barely there, buddy.
Well, they're very clever, those Australian spiders. Anyway, be careful. Be careful. All right.
Well, there you go. David Rothkopf, everybody. Hope you enjoyed and learned and created as much thought around those issues as I did when talking to Rothkopf. It's always fun to have him joining the conversation. He'll always go anywhere and talk about anything, and it's really become one of my favorites. Go buy his book, American Resistance. Listen to his podcast, Deep State Radio. Follow him on all the social media outlets. And that's it. I am wrapping it up and headed out to Australia with my shitty accent. I promise not to employ it while I'm there. You guys are the very best, and I cannot thank you enough for your support and your goodwill this past week, these past 3 years. Time for me to take a little bit of a break, but I'll talk to you. I love you. But for now, for the moment, bye-bye. Have a great day.
Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand